Funding for this program was provided in part by the RE Synergy Foundation. Content for the Sustainable World.
My dad was an old-school surgeon who always wished he was a rancher, and a man who took life by the horns and ran with it. Think John Wayne meets Ernest Hemingway meets Teddy Roosevelt. One thing that always embarrassed me, though, was that if my dad saw something interesting wherever he was, he'd go ask about it. He'd start up impromptu conversations with perfect strangers about crop rotation, cattle genetics, or how to get all those pieces of firewood in the load to stay on top of that one little donkey. I was mortified as a kid. Well, I grew up, and now that's me. I married a perfect man with itchy feet who loves all things music and film, and who makes documentaries just for the love of it. If you dump all of those things into a petri dish and let them stew for 25 years of blissful chaos, what do you get? Well, welcome to my life of vicarious agriculture. Come on along for the ride.
Jeremy Eng, son of Dr. Gerard Eng, longtime Devon breeder, raised on Devon beef, and very proud to have you guys here and be a part of this and showcase our cattle and the two of our work over the last 70 years from Devon cattle.
All right.
Absolutely. I've always loved the Devon cattle. They're the easiest cattle to work with, as you'll see.
So we're going to load a bull up on the trailer. It's time for breeding. We've been doing a lot of AI the last few years, but we have a new herd bull that's getting ready to go out on this farm for the very first time for us. So.
We went up to Senator Morris. His big farm was in Oregon, but he had a small farm in Poolesville, Maryland. And we went up and bought 2 bulls and 2 cows from Senator Morris. And that's how we got started with the Devons. And Senator Morris was truly the patron of the breed at that time. And they were such quiet cattle. I started showing cattle when I was about 13 years old. We would go every year and show our Devon cattle because they were so easy to break them and train them. And we fell in love with the Devon breed. We were crossing them mostly with Angus cattle. At the time, that's why we got 2 bulls. We really didn't need 2 bulls to breed the 2 Devon cows. We used the Devon bulls to breed to our Angus cows, and it proved to be a great cross for us.
These are just our showcase cattle that we keep at the home place, primarily polled cattle, because that's what people want. but there's both spring calves and fall calves in the herd on the cows. We typically would leave the spring calves on the cows through the winter, but this is the worst drought we've had since I've been here in 20 years. So we've started weaning the spring calves out, and we do it in stages because, of course, we don't use any kind of antibiotics. So, weaning 60 calves at once is a bigger biosecurity risk than doing, 3 groups of 20, spacing them out. So all the cows, I guess we can walk out here with them till Laurel gets back with a pup. But it's hard to keep it all straight, but we have a lot you can tell from their ear tags. So in their right ear is the sire line that they go back to. So as Dad talked about Senator Morse, a white tag would indicate the old Morse and Effingham lines. The red would be the favorite line. The green would be our Dairy Devon line. Orange would be Bayou line. Yellow would be Albion Holbrook. Pink would be Buckeye. And a lime green would be Kiwi or New Zealand genetics. Purple would be Australian genetics. And then in the left ear is, of course, the maternal line that the cows go back to. So we have that information. Of course, we also have their registration numbers in their ear. If it's not in there, then we know they haven't yet been registered. But everything in this group of cattle that's not a baby would be a registered cow. Average age of this group of cows is 11 years old. There's a lot of young ones in here, but there's a lot of teenagers in here as well. One of the great things with the Devon cows. But they have to calve every year. They have to be conformationally correct for us to keep them long term. And they have to be easy keepers. We don't use wormers on cattle after they're 2 years of age. And if they're chronically wormy or draw flies or don't stay in good shape, don't shed off, don't ultrasound for high marks in all of the different carcass characteristics, any of that stuff, and we'll wean them out. So
I don't know whether you all noticed, but the bull's going around and checking different cows. He can tell when they're in heat, and he's looking for a cow in heat that he can breed. Of course, the cow won't stand still if she's not in heat. If she's in heat, she'll stand still and let the bull breed her. But the bull's out there, he'll continue to go through the herd checking to try to find one in heat. The only way he can tell is through his nostrils. He's going around and checking them.
Well, the other thing he's doing, you're right, smell is what's guiding him, but he sees cows riding other cows. And if you look towards the White House in the distance, in that corner on top of the hill, there's 3 cows chasing each other in circles. And I'll bet you if we stand here long enough and watch that a cow will be in heat in that corner. And as we talked about at the barn, see her try to jump up right there. As we talked about at the barn, we want to identify her and make sure he finds her. It doesn't mean one of these other ones might not be as well, but they tend to pack together and chase each other. And there should be plenty of cows coming into heat this time of year. He should be breeding 3 or 4 cows a day. This was where we were strip grazing. You can tell by the different colors of grass. They still had a little bit here left from yesterday, but we were going to give them more. Now they've strung it out. So what I'm going to do, this wire could be hot right now. I'm going to holler for the dog, and I'll slide around here to the right. And I'll push all these cattle back through this direction. And then Laurel and Dad and the grandkids can put this fence back up.
one of the problems with clay soils is that it's difficult to get the nutrients up to the surface, correct? And so if you have something that puts out a nice nice long root and you can bring it to the surface, it definitely allows you to use more nutrients from the from deeper in the earth. But you're also having cattle running on these pasture, and so they are distributing more nitrogen and a nice little carbon nitrogen ratio, I'm assuming, all across the pasture. How do those things work together here?
Well, we got Conservationist of the Year award last year and Forage Producer of the Year award and all these things. And beavers have returned, dung beetles have returned, quail have returned. And I get an award and I go, I didn't try to do any of that. I just tried to work with nature. Most farmers, my neighbors are all killing things. You know, they're all poisoning plants, and dairy farmers have poison in the feed because the birds poop in the feed, and that makes the bacteria count go up in the milk, so they have a permit. Well, we got bird houses on every other post. We're working with the Smithsonian to help repopulate native bird species. And we've got a hunting blind in the distance. There's several of them across the farm. Every deer in the county, every goose in the county is going to end up here because we're the only ones with grass come February. So it you know, nature responds, and if you're observant, it all ties in together. Because we have these good grasses, when it does rain and we hold the water, there's less erosion, right? And everything has a purpose, right? See a thistle, we hate a thistle, we chop them down, but there's a reason that thistle is growing there, and a lot of times it's that deeper tap root. Soil wants cover, you know, and nature hates a monoculture. It wants a permaculture, and we try to replicate and work as close to nature as possible. If there's something there, not how do we kill it and get rid of it, but how do we adapt and use it? We've got a weed called bindweed that has gotten into some of our pastures, and it's called bindweed because it binds up heavy cropping equipment, and they hate it. And we don't like it, but I'm not going to spray all my pastures to get rid of it. I'm going to try to manage it the best way I can through mechanical means and using the cattle. He'll gather, he'll drive, he'll do everything that we need him to do. We're going to push these cow calves that have broken through the polywire back where they're supposed to go. With new babies, it's a bit of a process, so we'll see what happens. Come on. Here, away, away. Hey, away. Away. Let's go, bring him here. Away, push him. Good boy, away. Here. Here, come by. Current president of Red Devon USA, have done it several times, but with our big World Devon Congress coming up and celebration, I have to say I was encouraged to do it or rewarded with the privilege of doing it by the board, because obviously I've been at it a long time and have a lot of relationships with the overseas guests already. I've been on several World Devon Congresses and been a part of the World Devon Congresses here. There's pictures around the office, you know, as a child going to the World Devon Congress, and obviously have a different perspective as time goes on. But the Congress, of course, this year coincides with 400-year celebrations of Devon cattle coming to the Plymouth colony where we're going to reenact it, and basically the birth of the U.S. beef and dairy industry. I know that gets people all fired up, and there's challenges to that, and we've discussed it already a little. We're not claiming to be the first cattle brought to this country, but the Brits were the only country that was breeding cattle for beef and for dairy, in that time period. Everybody else had draft animals, and when they aged out or got injured, they beefed them, or feral cattle breeds that were used to clear land, but also essentially hunted for meat. So the Brits had a head start by 100 years on the rest of the world, breeding just for high quality meat. And Robert Bakewell, John Tanner Davy, and others, of course, well noted throughout history for their work. And so, they brought the Devons to Plymouth not just for their meat quality, but also for their dairy and their draft abilities, also for their docility to go on the ship, their longevity. We've got the 30-year-old cow out here that won a national championship at 28, and you only do that if your feet last and your teeth last and your fertility lasts, and it's an incredible. I always say they're the most practical breed in the world because they're just easy. They keep easy, they flush easy, calve easy.
But you've touched on something that's a rather pertinent thing for this year, the Devon Congress, and the idea that the animals came to this country about 400 years ago. And you also mentioned Bakewell, who's some people say the father of selective breeding, right? He wanted breeding for a purpose. But we have a unique situation here because we had a cattle breed in the south of Devon that started and came over a couple of years after the Pilgrims. 1623, I believe, was about when they...
23, 24, there's some debate, but mostly 1623 is the most widely agreed upon date.
Yes. And they came over as kind of one thing that was reflective of those gorgeous cattle in the south of England that were good for cream and multi-purpose animals. And once they got here, they had kind of a uniform experience until this last century. And then they sort of split a little bit. You have a unique perspective this year. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with both sides of the Devon industry.
Well, absolutely, and thank you for your compliments. I am blessed to have a wonderful family, and my dad and mom took us to Australia in 1984. That's an opportunity that not everybody gets. Of course, at that point, I was looking at the kangaroos and the koala bears, not the cattle as much, but being surrounded with knowledgeable cattlemen, both in traveling but also in most notably Dr. Stuart Fowler lived on our farm for years, and when I took over, I was handed a breeding program, a road map, breed this to that and that to this, and don't mess it up. And so, boy, I stuck to that for as long as I could, tried to be observant and learn so that when the time came, I could do my own things. But I'm also blessed that we have semen in the semen tank from 50, 60, 70 years ago. So if we use something in a bloodline that does surprise us with some bad feet or something, we can go backwards and repair that, cull that out, but still have the genetic material to go back to. To your question with John, I can't talk about John without talking about Diurna and Ray and John's relatives who have both passed on, Ray Clark and Diurna Kibbe, who I met long before I met John. I'll never forget Ray Clark meeting me in Belfast, New York at the lumber mill and backing our trailers up to each other at 11:30 at night and running a heifer over to his trailer to take home. He had beef and dairy and knowledge of both. And guys like Ray were always willing to share their knowledge and wisdom as he's done with you. So, I didn't really consider the dairy as a part of our breeding program. That was something that came about. We bought a bull named Trailblazer of Grovemont, picture up on the wall behind you, from Colonial Williamsburg, but bred by a man named Weston Utter, who was a good friend of Diurna Kibbe's, and we used that bull mainly for breeding heifers too, for calving ease. But the quality of the calves was fantastic, and so we continued to use him. Coincidentally, we had a bull named Lakota's H48, who was a homozygous polled bull, and so we could breed all of our Trailblazer daughters back to this H48 bull and remove the horns and get a lot of meat back over that dairy. And so that was kind of, for us, the beginning of incorporating dairy Devons into our herd, and I would speculate that 40% of our herd has an American milking Devon animal in it. Of course, they all have the same pedigrees if we go back far enough. They all come from the same lineage in England.
Up till what, the 1950s or 60s?
Up till the 1950s. And so they of course collected data on the heavier milking animals. And Devons were a naturally horned breed. It's another picture somewhere. I'll get you before you go, of the bull Missouri up in that corner. Was the first polled Devon bull in the 1920s. But Missouri was the first one that actually went into production, and that started it. And of course, there was some backlash from the rest of the Devon world because it wasn't true to the breed. But the rest of the world soon followed, except for England, and England followed, years later. And I think the reality is different things sneak into the blood pool along the way. But if that happened, I'd rather it happened in 1920 than in 2020. One of the neat things with this breed is, just like John and the dairy Devons, the people that owned the beef Devons in the 70s, 80s, 90s loved the breed. After World War II, corn subsidies and feedlot was the way of the beef industry, and still is. And you get paid for pounds of carcass, not quality of carcass. There's some incentives for quality, but the system is based on hitting certain marks for carcass size, which purebred Devons never would do. So those with purebred Devons either crossbred them to fit that mold, or got rid of them, or kept them. Livestock Conservancy's done some great work on why do we breed, and we either breed for production or conservation, and production can be measured in different ways. Like you work with a longhorn, some people are just interested in horn length. Does it have the Texas twist? Does it have what? And other breeders don't care about that. They want good carcasses.
But whatever it takes to make them economically viable is what they're heading for.
Well, and what pays the bills,
Yeah.
right? Because most of the world can't just keep a breed of cattle because they love them. But we were fortunate that happened, because while the rest of the industry changed, the Devons remained true to form. And then when science started to learn that maybe feeding cattle heavy corn diets wasn't natural and didn't produce as healthy of a beef product, and the grass-fed beef, boom kind of happened, the Devons, were suited for it. In fact, when I got back into farming, I wanted to do grass-fed, and I didn't even realize the breed my family had been using was the breed designed by centuries of grass farming, the butcher's breed, as they called it in England. I was like, this is too good to be true. Um, and so, of course, went much heavier with that grass model. Um, you know, we owned hay equipment, and I still have 2 barns that hold 600 round bales apiece, and we don't feed, 30 bales a year anymore. And we used to fill those barns.
Yeah, but all of the beef industry kind of went through this shift, did they not? Where they started saying, we're going to put on more beef, we're going to select for that thing. So even though you went from that, you said, look, we want the healthy beef. The red Devon, the beef Devon idea is more of that kind of beef production side of the Devon animal. Before the 50s and 60s, it was the same as that what we might think of as American, like the milking Devons, the original milking Devons. But mankind started selecting for the beef component, right?
Well, absolutely, for the beef component, but I like to think the good breeders selected for balance before they selected for a trait. And if you look at, I'll pick on Angus. They're the biggest guys. They sit on top of the tower, so you get stones thrown at you. But they chased size, right? And with a black-hided animal, you can crossbreed it to anything and still call it an Angus. I've seen Longhorns called certified Angus beef because they had enough black in them.
Get better price for them that way.
Exactly, that's what people are chasing, and that's still what people are chasing. Most people breed cattle, load the calves up, take them to the local livestock market, and they get paid on the quality of the animal from outside, but not from inside. And the majority of our customers are doing direct-to-consumer production, so they're more concerned with quality of beef, but also cost of production. Can I get this animal finished in as short a time as possible, even though I'm still doing it just on grass? And so, when we talk about, well, they've done selective breeding for hundreds of years or thousands of years, true, but were they all selecting for the same thing? Because again, to pick on the Angus, they chased size and outcrossing, and they got that. Well, then they got calving problems. So then they bred for calving ease. Well, then they got narrow heads and shoulders. And so then they bred for, and it goes on. And you go to a sale and, you see guys in the stands buying on adjusted yearling weight or EPDs. Meanwhile, the bull's in the ring trying to kill the ringmen and going bananas, but they're selecting with tunnel vision.
But regardless, over even a very short period of time, you can have one trait influence the whole direction of a breed, right? I mean, you're selecting heavily.
Well, and in cattle, it takes 3 years for your genetic selection to manifest, right? I breed the cow, AI, she has the calf. A year later, I'm weaning, raising the calf, breeding the calf. A year later, she calves. Only now do I find out, oh, she has a great udder or not so great of an udder. Well, now I've already AI'd 50 more cows to that bull. So
you're 2 years into this thing.
I'm 2 years into it. So that's tough in that it takes a long time to make change. But if you speed up the process, maybe that time would have taught you something, right? So, but I hate when a scientist says, we've determined this, right? Because science has determined a lot of things only to determine something different down the road, right? Tell me that based on the information you have, this is what you believe. I can accept that. But to say I know or I've determined, the only thing I know for sure is that the longer I farm, the more I know I don't know.
That's exactly it. And if you're a true scientist at heart, which I believe you are, the more you know about all things, the less you know. And this applies to history as well. So I know there's a slight controversy. I don't know if it's exactly a controversy, but there's a possibility of disagreement in the history of when the Devon cattle came over, for example. I mean, history is history, right? And yet, the more research they're doing, Some people are saying, no, it wasn't 1623, it was 1624, because we cross-reference with this book and this thing. And 10 years from now, it might go back to 1621. I mean, who knows where it's going to go? But you have to recognize that you can only do the best with the information you have at the time. Get the best information you can and go from there, right? But with a breeding program, it's particularly difficult, I would think, because you can't back out of many of these decisions genetically, right? They're there.
Well, if you have semen and embryo stored, you can. And one huge advantage I have to having hundreds of cattle on multiple farms is I can take a Devon bull and crossbreed him for a year or two and see what the calves do. If that bad udder gene exists, at least I haven't had to do it in my herd. If a breeder only has 25 cows, they don't have that ability. And if I've got 10 cows and I AI 3 of them and I get 2 calves born and I don't like them, I go, well, that bull wasn't worth a squat. Well, is that a real test, right? And so it makes it very difficult. And as you say, we're all selecting, we're all making decisions based on the information we have. So if I try this new, fly insecticide tag and have less flies next year, was it that tag? Or was it we didn't have as much rain this year? Or, there's so many factors that could play into it. And so, our philosophy is we're not smarter than God or Mother Nature. Let's work with Mother Nature and the animals, and let's promote life, not death. Get away from herbicides, insecticides, and that let some of that natural selection happen, right? I can't afford to put 5 bulls and 30 cows on an island and leave them for 100 years. If you could, you would have an animal perfectly adapted to that environment that would thrive and do well. But who's got that kind of time, right? So I've got to manage them closer, but I can be observant, and I like to think we're making it better. And just like sitting here, I'll stray from your questions out in the field too, and I can talk all day about this stuff. So.